Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Welcome to Double Helix, Blueprint of Nations, Season 1, Episode 2, Into the Mountaintop, Martin Luther King's Visionary Leadership. Welcome back to Double Helix, Blueprint of Nations. Thanks for returning to the conversation. Today, we're delving into the impactful legacy of an American leadership giant, Martin Luther King Jr. Do you recognize that speech? It was delivered on the night of April 3rd, 1968, just one day before his tragic murder in Memphis, Tennessee. It turned out to be quite prophetic. It should also tell you all you need to know about the essence of the man. Soaring rhetoric, hope in the face of fear, and above all, a vision of the future that caused all to dream and believe that joy, to be understood in this context as national reconciliation, was just around the corner. King defined a generation of leadership in America and still cast a significant influence over the entire nation. He embodies what Abraham Lincoln termed our better angels, representing a belief in humanity's ability to overcome ingrained biases and prejudice. Like any great leader, King's profound belief in the ultimate power of love to overcome wasn't an overnight realization. This conviction evolved over a brief yet impactful life where he navigated the full spectrum of America, opportunities and gregarious freedoms in the North, intermingled with the harsh realities of being a black man in the American South. Through this challenging journey, King resolved to combat bigotry and hatred with action, resolution, and love. Facing oppression and abuse, he declared, "We will match your capacity to inflict suffering with our capacity to endure suffering. Bomb our homes, and we will still love you." Uttering these words while enduring beatings, imprisonment, and the constant threat of lynchings requires extraordinary amounts of strength. This radicalization of love, as I've chosen to call it, draws inspiration from the examples of Gandhi and Thoreau's civil disobedience. However, it captivated and transformed America in a way very few things ever have. He was essentially new, and a transformative force for good that called not just on some, but all Americans to be different and to dream different dreams, to act in different ways. King's courageous and selfless brand of leadership not only inspired the nation and the world, but also compelled the country to confront its own soul. It forced America to stare into the dark abyss of racism and prejudice. King's leadership stands as a maximum expression of what Americans aspire to be when at their best. Perhaps that's why, after his death, King has become infinitely more popular than he ever was while alive. In recent times, King's popularity has taken an unintended turn. As he's been memorialized through national holidays, parks, streets, and various other honors, there is a risk of reducing him to a caricature. The monumental and revolutionary aspects of what he and his generation sought to create seem somewhat overshadowed. In reality, Reverend King envisioned a grand-scale reimagining of American society, resembling a sort of New Deal for America, in the mold of Roosevelt, a vision aimed at fulfilling the true measure of the American Constitution and national ethos. Unlike most leaders we'll feature in this season of Double Helix, who led nations or armies, Martin Luther King Jr. led an idea, a way of thinking, a code of functioning that serves as a guidebook for nations and individuals alike. His unwavering belief in nonviolence as the ultimate weapon against bigotry and racism was a revolution in itself. It forever altered the meaning of protest and the perceived power they could wield over entire systems and nations. It is indeed a true leadership legacy, and not just for America, but for the world. Because despite his relatively short time in the national stage, King's imprint reaches across time to new generations. Reflecting on the protests that surged following the killing of George Floyd amid the height of the pandemic, it was King's speeches and quotes that resurfaced among the chorus of voices. Even some 60-plus years after his death, his voice remained the clearest and most direct admonishment to the conscience of America. In this enduring manner, his legacy persists, with his life and tragic death forever intertwined with the fabric of America. But before those tumultuous and difficult days of the summer of 2020, when once again race caused America and the world to convulse, we have to go back to the genesis and to the steps and experiences that shaped this very real strain of American thought and action. We have to push our way past the heavy tolls of the war on terror, before the trauma of 9/11, past Reagan's America and the echoes of Watergate and the Vietnam War, even further back, before the epoch-defining moment that was the Kennedy assassination. Our journey takes us back to a different America, back to Alabama, specifically to the Cleveland Avenue bus route at around 6 p.m. on December 1st, 1955. It was on that bus, within that route, that Rosa Parks, an unassuming yet powerful and spirited Black woman, ignited the spark of freedom. When asked to give up her seat to a white rider, she simply said no. Her refusal to yield her seat to a white rider, as mandated by the Jim Crow laws of segregated Montgomery, set in motion a crusade of unparalleled power in American history. This act, the first in a drama unfolding over the next decade and a half, became the launching pad for Martin Luther King Jr. to fulfill the profound purpose he somehow knew awaited him. Born Michael King Jr. in Atlanta, Georgia, on January 15, 1929, Martin Luther King's upbringing as the son of a prominent Atlanta preacher predisposed him to oratory. Early on, he displayed a remarkable ease with words and public speaking. His higher education spanned Pennsylvania and Boston, where he met his future wife, Coretta. Together, they embarked on a journey that led him to pastor his first church, a small congregation in Montgomery, Alabama, within the shadow of the state capitol. As a local pastor, Martin Luther King assumed a pivotal role in leading the organization of the bus boycott initiated by Montgomery's Black community after Rosa Parks' arrest for her act of quiet resistance. In his inaugural speech as leader of this new assembly, King made his intentions clear, declaring, "Now, let us say that we are not here advocating violence. We have overcome that. But the great glory of American democracy is the right to protest for right. And if we are wrong, God Almighty is wrong." As he became transformed by the crowds, the gravity of his mission and the weight of it all slowly but surely began to transform King's character, and by association, that of the nation. King became ever more somber, heavier in his burden. America began to wake up to a reality it had chosen to ignore for the 85 plus years since Reconstruction ended in the South following the U.S. Civil War. The struggle for breaking the back of Montgomery's segregationist bus policies would not be an easy one. In many ways, the beginning struggles in Montgomery would contain the genetic code, as it were, of almost all that was to follow in King's life. Montgomery was the proving ground of leadership upon which King's soaring rhetoric, magnetic personality, and ability to push forward and lead through mass exhortations, appealing to those better angels of his fellow Americans, would find their footing. One of the key strategies that would soon develop for King was nonviolence, with the goal of putting the naked aggression of segregation in front of the eyes of America and the world. When done in secret, in hidden moments and in orderly laws, and masked with the veneer of civility, segregation looked almost benign. But it was King's ultimate success that he was able to give voice and vision to the reality of it, to bring forth violent moments of truth that made clear the toll that the brutality of racism took on the souls of those who practiced it and of those who endured it. While facing threats in his life, bombings, and constant harassment by local authorities, King remained focused on his ultimate goal, which he described as national reconciliation, the creation of, as he called it, the beloved community. Here again, we see the theme we mentioned in our previous episode resurface. Martin Luther King Jr. was a person of exceptional qualities, to be sure, but one who could have been one of the many billions of talented individuals who walked the earth. But like Washington before him, when life happened, King was almost transformed by the moment and catapulted to new and unsuspecting heights, all the while battling his own inner demons and inadequacies. His struggles with the weight of the moment and sexual promiscuity only served to fixate in him an even deeper sense of purpose and mission, which may not have been fully realized without the internal pressures that existed within him. It would take a year and a final Supreme Court decision declaring segregation on the buses of Montgomery to be illegal to see out victory in the city. But here were the first and perhaps most important steps of how King had begun to transform the consciousness of the nation. His leadership was unique in American history in that it cut across classes, social economic status, and race. His message of righteousness, justice, and equality could appeal to the masses of America. King declared at one point that people of color around the world could never be free as long as there were poor white people. And so, beginning with his first steps in Montgomery, King would eventually grow to encompass not just the end of segregation and racist policies in America, but the end of poverty and the restructuring of society along more equitable lines all across the country and the world. Drawing on this nascent message of a more equitable society, we now move forward to the moment and speech which is enshrined in the halls of honor of all American speeches, right along with the Gettysburg Address, FDR's first inaugural, and Kennedy's speech on race, just to name a few. So let's move forward in time from 1956 to 1963, and the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The jobs part is often forgotten. King's struggle, as we've discussed before, was also one against poverty across racial spectrums. The March on Washington was to be the first of many civic acts of protest and mass congregation. Its power and imagery, punctuated by the memorable "I Have a Dream" speech, forever altered the way Americans understood social organizing, marches, and the ability of peaceful protest alone to mobilize an entire nation. It was a hot and bright August day in Washington, D.C. The eyes of America were upon it. Stretching from the Lincoln Memorial all the way to the Washington Monument, a mass of humanity had gathered. The March on Washington stands as a historic assembly that drew perhaps as many as 250,000 souls, united in the call for civil and economic rights. Almost a third of the marchers were white, thus helping to dispel the notion that civil rights in America was only a black issue. It was a defining moment in the civil rights movement, showcasing the power of collective action and peaceful protest. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, and Martin Luther King Jr. played a central role as one of the key organizers and as the keynote speaker. In some ways, the March in Washington was a sort of coming out party for the civil rights movement, which had been gaining momentum since the early steps in Montgomery. King had become the avatar of the movement, and the stage was set before him, and it could not have been set any better. Now was the time for leadership, and he would meet the moment in ways few had before and few have since. Besides the stated name of the march, the political goal was to lobby President Kennedy and Congress for the passage of the Public Accommodations Bill, a bill that proposed ending segregation in all public facilities across the nation. King's turn to speak came at the end of the program. It had all been building up to this moment. King, perhaps carried by the energy of the masses or perhaps touched by a moment of inspiration, began to recall another speech he had given in parts at other occasions. He began, "Even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I have a dream." With the audience in his grasp, the speech's resonance went beyond the immediate audience, reaching millions across the nation. Anyway, I think the speech is too good for you not to hear it, and I can't do it justice. So here's a part of the speech.
I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
From there, the speech picked up steam along with King's soaring rhetoric. He concluded with a proclamation of freedom, with a vision of a better future, a future where, as he put it, all of God's children, black, white, Jew, and Gentiles, Protestant and Catholics, would be able to join hands and sing to freedom and unity. This kind of soaring vision of what America and the world could be had not been articulated quite this way before, and likely not since. You want to talk about a legacy? Look no further. By channeling the unwavering faith and optimism of his creed and forlorn hope in the consummation of the American creed, King deposited into the very soul of the nation, that very day, the ember that still burns to this day, which calls for a different kind of society. When the darkness of the current discourse seems to consume all of American society, it is still King's light, exemplified through this speech, that harkens back to a better place, a place worth striving for. The dream articulated by King wasn't just for the African American community. It was a dream for an America where justice and equality prevailed for all. The influence of the march and the speech were pivotal in shifting public opinion enough to drive results with the law. When, after Kennedy's assassination that following November, President Johnson called for the passage of the sweeping Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, much could be owed to that speech on that summer day in Washington, D.C. The speech's enduring legacy has shaped the trajectory of American society in profound ways. In classrooms and in university lecture halls, the I Have a Dream speech is often dissected, discussed, and analyzed. It has become a fundamental part of curricula, providing students with insights into the struggle for civil rights and the power of advocacy. In fact, as we look ahead in time to the summer of 2020, during the George Floyd protest and America's latest grappling with racial equality and justice, it was perhaps because what has happened so completely violates the call for equality, justice, and an end to discrimination that is laid out on the speech that the outcry of offenses becomes even more painful. King's dream serves as a benchmark against which progress is measured and a reminder of the work that still needs to be done. In essence, the I Have a Dream speech has transcended its moment in history, becoming a timeless and universal symbol for the pursuit of justice and equality. Its impact is woven into the very fabric of America, contributing to an ongoing dialogue about the nation's ideals and the work required to fulfill them. But King's legacy extended beyond the famous 1963 speech. He continued to campaign for the enforcement of the hard-won legislative wins, with a particularly somber summer in St. Augustine, Florida, in 1964. There, in St. Augustine, lawless bands of Klan members, aided and abetted by the police, sought to maintain the system of segregation that had been in place since the Civil War ended. The experiences in St. Augustine led King to declare it the most lawless place he had ever been to, and further put to the test his notion of radical love, which, so far, had yielded positive, albeit limited results. The final test of this revolutionary approach of radical love was to come in Selma, Alabama, in early 1965. On March 7th, on a blustery Sunday morning, a crowd of civil rights activists, around 500 of them, led by John Lewis and Hosea Williams, marched into Selma, attempting to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge on their way to Montgomery. In a day that would be known as Bloody Sunday, Alabama state troopers brutally attacked and beat the marchers as they attempted to cross the bridge in marching for voting rights. In yet another violent moment of truth, the hopes and dreams of the prior year continued to be confronted by the realities of the calcified racism of the South. The shocking scenes served as both a reminder and a call to action to those seeking change in the arena of civil rights. Before the horrified eyes of the nation, once again, bigotry and racism showed their true face. In the aftermath of Bloody Sunday, King joined with fellow activists and resolved to march again, using his significant national profile to lend further credibility to the movement and its aims. The march had its intended effect. President Johnson, in announcing the presentation of the Voting Rights Act, declared that the recent scenes of Black Americans risking their lives and safety have awakened the conscience of the nation. Once again, leading through his radicalized version of love, one that surpassed most common understanding, King was able to help achieve what had seemed impossible only a decade earlier. In revisiting the Selma to Montgomery March, we uncover a pivotal moment that not only altered the trajectory of the civil rights movement, but also left an indelible mark on the American conscience. The march galvanized support for the 1965 Voting Rights Act, a key legislation aimed at fully securing the rights of Black Americans, which had originally been granted some 100 years earlier with the passage of the 13, 14, and 15 amendments to the United States Constitution. In a rather poetic statement that closed out the circles of marches, congregations, speeches, and miseries that King and his movement had endured over the past decade, President Johnson declared from the Oval Office that it's not just Negroes, but really all of us, who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice. And we shall overcome. While the rights that King and others like him had secured at the court of law would not materialize out of thin air, the doors that were open in that riotous decade could never be closed again in the American discourse. The damage of over 300 years of generational disparity, scars of subjugation, and political disenfranchisement cannot be healed in a decade, in 20, 30, or even 60 years. However, the hallowed mountaintop that King had envisioned in his dreams was finally open to his people and to all of America. In the years preceding his tragic demise, King found himself navigating the tumultuous currents of Vietnam and the counterculture movement, his once potent message fading into the fray. Feeling like a stranger in a strange land, he shifted his focus to poverty and vehemently opposed to what he saw as a voracious capitalist system. The fatalist within him foresaw his own demise, and on the afternoon of April 4th, 1968, the second to last chapter in the loss of American innocence was written, with the murders of John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy serving as the prelude and the finale. America sees itself as a righteous and moral nation, a beacon of compassion, willing to confront its own demons, the idealized image. However, this image often clashes with historical realities. It was Dr. King who invited the nation to face the stark reality and violence of segregation, challenging the core of American ideals. His moral crusade put the nation's righteousness to the test, revealing the deep-seated racist sentiments that still lurk beneath the surface. As we witness the recent backlash on race, King's work remains unfinished. His example, vision, and legacy live on in the consciousness of those striving for a more just and equitable society, cementing King's place as a DNA marker in the fabric of American leadership. I want to thank you once again for joining us on Double Helix. As we forge ahead, don't forget to share and rate our podcast wherever you listen. Together, we can propel Double Helix on our quest to uncover the blueprint of nations. Follow us on social media at Helix History, on Twitter, and send us your questions via email. Our website is in the works, I promise. Next time, we'll leap across the pond, leaving the United States momentarily. Our focus will shift to a man who acted as a linchpin in the history of nations, defining an era, law, warfare, and even fashion. His imprint on his adopted nation persists to this day. Join us as we explore the leadership legacy of the Little Corporal, the former Emperor of France, Napoleon Bonaparte. Until then, stay curious and keep seeking the blueprints that shape our world.